All right, joining me once again here on the Matthew Filipovich Show is Mychal Denzel Smith. Mychal is a writer for The Nation magazine, which you can find at thenation.com. He is a Nobler Fellow for the Nation Institute. You can find him on Twitter at Mychal Smith, and Mychal is with a Y. Mychal, thank you so much for being on the show again.
Thanks for having me, Matt.
All right, so Mychal, as I'm sure everyone has heard, George Zimmerman was in fact found not guilty in the murder of Trayvon Martin this last weekend. Let me just start out by asking, what is your reaction to the verdict?
I honestly was surprised at how angry I was when I found out the verdict. I was sitting by myself in a restaurant. I was at a sports bar, actually, and I asked them to turn it to CNN so that I could see the verdict. And when I saw that it was not guilty, I knew it was going to be not guilty. Like, I had been preparing myself since last, March when I found out that he was going to be acquitted of this. But it really just hit me in that moment that, a 17-year-old was killed and through no fault of his own. He was killed and no one is going to be held accountable for it. And I cried and I just felt this anger but it didn't surprise me. It just infuriated me.
Yeah, I mean, you've been covering the trial and obviously the ridiculous stand your ground laws, and I think a lot of people were thinking that this was going to go the way it did, but it's still you can mentally think and kind of prepare yourself. Oh, that's what's going to happen, but when it actually happens, you just like you still can't believe you still can't really believe it.
Yeah, because that cynicism just doesn't override the emotion of realizing, again, that there's a 17-year-old dead. I mean, how many of us would want our lives to have stopped at 17? 17 is not a good point to end anyone's life at all. I
Yeah.
mean, you don't want the last thing you experience to be your teenage years. I mean, like, but that's what Trayvon Martin is. That's all he got. George Zimmerman cut down his potential. He robbed him of his entire life. And even though he knew he was going to get away with it, it still stings. It just stings because, again, there's that devaluing of black life that goes along with this. Again, Trayvon Martin, killer, George Zimmerman, was not arrested for 44 days. It took people out in the streets marching across the entire country for the Sanford police to get up enough gall to just arrest him. And it's like, how little do you think of this dead black boy that you accept his killer's story right there on the spot and don't arrest him? And then to see this racist defense of what George Zimmerman did take place, because whether or not you call Mark O'Mara and Don West racist, it's immaterial. What they did in stoking the fear of black criminality and black violence and black youth and black manhood, and the way that they interrogated and berated Rachel Jeantel while she was on the stand, and the way that Mark O'Mara invoked the same justification for killing Trayvon Martin as they did for lynching when he brought in George Zimmerman's former neighbor, Olivia Ventolin, who's a white woman who told a story about two young African Americans burglarizing her home while her children were there, which had absolutely nothing to do with the case at hand, but simply put into the mind of the jury that George Zimmerman was not only protecting himself that night, but he was protecting this white woman
Yeah.
and his neighborhood from the violence and viciousness of black thugs. When you get to all of that and you add that all up, it's sick. It's sick, the devaluing of black life. And that's what we had with Trayvon. Not only was he cut down and his life was taken from him, they rewrote the script of his life after it was taken from him. He wasn't here to defend himself.
Yeah. No, I mean they murdered this man murdered a child, and then they smeared the child that he murdered. They again, like, that's the thing. It's like, this Trayvon was a kid. He was legally a child, and he was murdered.
He had just turned 17. Like, he was 16 and 22 days. He had just turned 17 years old. And, I mean, this is ridiculous. He murdered a child and got away with it. And then in his death, his parents and his family had to sit there as they painted a picture of their brother, their son, their cousin, their nephew as this horrible human being, this vicious human being that would attack George Zimmerman without any provocation whatsoever and tried to kill him that night. Because his story never, ever made sense. It never added up.
Yeah. I mean, you watched the trial. Do you think, I mean, I'm not a lawyer. I don't believe you're a lawyer either. Do you think the prosecution did its job? I mean, do you think is it just the stand your ground was the reason that it was? I mean, obviously the defense would, I'll back you up. I'll say that it was the lawyers were completely racist in the defense. But what did in your opinion, did the prosecution just fall down on the job? Because some people are saying that they clearly. Some people are saying the prosecution didn't seem to have a clue of what they were actually trying to accomplish here. Do you think the prosecution blew it? Do you think that it was just the ridiculousness of stand your ground? Is it all these things? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's a combination of things. It's the self-defense law, in which you only have to prove. You don't have to prove that your life was an actual imminent danger. You have to prove that you were in fear that you were going to lose your life. And to get into someone's state of mind about whether or not they were afraid they were going to lose their life, I'm afraid. I have anxiety disorder. I'm afraid I'm going to lose my life constantly. Put me in a situation where I'm, just in an argument with someone, and if I fall out and I'm scared that I'm going to lose my life because of my anxiety, and I kill someone that day, like, what then happens if they did nothing to me? But I mean, it's also the prosecution. I mean, they had a high bar to clear with what was required to prove second-degree murder. Now, we can bring into, the special prosecutor for charging second-degree murder, whether or not that was the right decision to do that. But they also had, manslaughter on the table, and the jury found them not guilty of that as well. But I think what the prosecution didn't do until the very last day, when they were, or the last days with the closing arguments, was paint the picture of George Zimmerman as the wannabe vigilante cop that he was, and also stress that call where he uses that explicit language and derogatory language to refer to Trayvon Martin. When he says effing punks, these a-holes always get away, that was it. That was the ill will, depraved mind right there. That's what they could have keyed in on. They also could have keyed in on the fact that, George Zimmerman knew the protocol.
Yeah.
He had done this over and over again, where he had called the non-emergency number to report suspicious activity in his neighborhood. Is it not, evidence of a depraved mind that he knew how to handle this situation, but did otherwise in this instance? That it seemed to me, at least, that in this moment something broke in him, and he was simply tired. And in that depraved state, he killed Trayvon Martin. They could have hammered that home better. They could have hammered it home more often. But I think what the prosecution made its mistake was they were going to ride on the emotionality of it, and they were going to ride on the public support to get them the guilty verdict, but it doesn't work that way in a court of law.